When most people think about Genesis 4, they think about Cain killing Abel. And honestly, that makes sense. It's one of the darkest moments in the Bible. A brother kills his brother. The very first family falls apart. Blood hits the ground. God asks Cain where Abel is, and Cain responds with one of the coldest lines in Scripture. Am I my brother's keeper? It's a mess. But here's what I've been thinking about all week. What happens after that? Because if you keep reading Genesis, things don't immediately get better. Abel is still dead. Cain is still gone. Violence has already entered the story. And yet, right in the middle of all of that, Genesis quietly says something that I think most people miss. Eve gives birth to Seth and says, God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel. She doesn't say another son. She says another seed. And the more I sat with that word, the more I realized Genesis was doing something bigger. Because if Eve just wanted to say she had another child, she could have just said that. But she doesn't. She says seed. Now that's different. A son belongs to a family. A seed belongs to a future. A son replaces a person. A seed carries a possibility. And I think Genesis wants us to notice that distinction. Because honestly, nothing looks healed at this point in the story. That's what makes this so interesting. Cain's family is actually doing pretty well. They're building cities. They're raising livestock. They're making musical instruments. They're working with metal. Civilization is moving forward. If you looked from the outside, you'd probably say things are improving. But Genesis keeps dropping hints that something is still off. The biggest example is Lamech. Lamech basically boasts about violence. He talks about killing someone and then says he'll be avenged 77-fold. And that's the crazy part. The violence didn't disappear. It matured. It learned how to justify itself. It learned how to speak. It learned how to sound reasonable. And honestly, I don't think that's just an ancient story. I think that's something all of us know. I've seen it in my own life. This past year has been one of the hardest years I've ever gone through. Divorce, custody battles, moving, financial pressure, trying to show up for work, trying to be a good dad, trying to build something meaningful while also feeling like life is hitting me from 10 different directions. And if I'm being honest, there were moments where nothing looked healed. Nothing looked fixed. The situation was still the situation. The stress was still the stress. The uncertainty was still there. On paper, not much had changed. But that's exactly why this story speaks to me. Because Genesis doesn't say the wound disappeared. It says another seed appeared. That's different. The story isn't pretending everything is okay. It's saying another direction became possible. And I think that's one of the deepest patterns in Scripture. Again and again, the story looks finished. Abel dies, the seed survives. The earth fills with violence, the seed survives. The flood comes, the seed survives. Israel goes into slavery, the seed survives. Jerusalem falls, the seed survives. The Bible keeps refusing to let collapse have the final word. Not because bad things don't happen, they do, a lot of them. But because Scripture seems convinced that descent is never the only movement happening. There's always another possibility present, even when nobody can see it yet. Then Genesis says something else that most people just read right past. After Seth has a son named Enosh, we get this little verse. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. And I think that's one of the biggest turning points in the entire Bible. Think about it. Up until now, God is always the one calling. Where are you? Why are you angry? Where is your brother? God keeps reaching toward humanity. God keeps asking the questions. God keeps initiating the conversation. Then suddenly something changes. Humanity starts calling. Humanity starts reaching. Humanity starts turning. And I think that's why Seth matters. Not because Seth is some superhero. Not because Seth fixes the world. Not because Seth builds a better civilization than Cain. Seth matters because he represents the survival of another direction. The survival of remembrance. The survival of the possibility that humanity can still turn towards something deeper. And honestly, I think that's where this becomes personal for all of us. Most of us know what it's like to live in survival mode. You go to work, pay bills, handle your responsibilities, deal with a shit ton of family drama, deal with a shit ton of stress, deal with disappointment. And after a while, life just becomes reaction. You're just responding to what comes next. I've had seasons like that. Maybe you have too. But every now and then, something shifts. Not because all your problems disappear. Not because life suddenly becomes easy. But because you start paying attention again. You start listening again. You start reaching again. You remember what matters. You remember what you belong to. You remember there's something deeper than the story you've been trapped inside. And maybe that's what Genesis is showing us through Seth. Not that life instantly changes, but that the story is never over. Abel is still dead. Violence is still in the world. The flood is about to come. Cities are being built. People are still defending themselves. Nothing on the outside looks all that different. And yet, everything has changed. Another seed appeared. Humanity began to call. The direction turned. And the rest of the Bible follows that turning. Maybe that's why this story has stayed with me all week. Because I think every one of us eventually reaches a moment where it feels like nothing is healed yet. Nothing is fixed yet. Nothing is resolved yet. And that's exactly where Genesis places Seth. Right in the middle of the mess. Right in the middle of the uncertainty. Right in the middle of the wound. Right in the middle of the bullshit. And somehow the story says, another seed appeared. Maybe that's hope. Not the kind that pretends everything is okay. The kind that reminds us the story isn't finished yet.